So I'm sitting here, no camera tonight, which is fine because, it's just fine. I don't feel like fighting with it anymore. I've been fighting with it for the last 5 minutes. It's okay. Two things I want to point out. One, if I sound tired, it's because I just got my COVID booster yesterday, because sure, why not? And there's still a plague going on, so let's all be safe. But it is absolutely very slowly exhausting me. So if I sound like I'm not entirely dozing off, but like I'm sitting here in a thick bathrobe, hanging on the end of a chair, pumping tea and water into my body, it's because I am. And the second thing, you should know that if you are not already listening to John Helps You Write Better, available wherever you get podcasts, you are positively, absolutely going to want to start listening starting tomorrow. We're in the home stretch of the 30 and 30, but specifically in the next couple days, there's some really great stuff coming out, and I think it will really do you a great service to get that in short rotation. Each episode is more or less about 10 minutes long, so not exactly a hardship or a tough listen, and it's all helpful, especially the next couple days. So please do check it out. I'm going to get a mouthful of water, and then we'll get started. I hope you're doing good. It's nice to be here. It's nice to be doing this. This is something special tonight. I think you're going to like it. All right. Mouthful of water, and then off we go. I have no other PS. I thought I did. Super don't. Okay. Here we go. That's the wrong button.
All right.
Yeah, we're just leaving
Just
that error in.
remember
That's fine.
What I've taught you.
What the fuck is that?
Hey, yo.
Let's go while we're young.
All right, here we are, back in business and moving along. So tonight I've got something different. I've got something good for you. So what happens normally is that in a writer's chat, I grab questions from all over my social media, all over my DMs, all over everywhere. But I get asked this question or variants of this one question over and over. How do I write X scene? And sometimes they ask about climaxes, sometimes they ask about sex scenes, sometimes people are asking about action beats, sometimes they're asking about how to write resolutions, all that stuff. And they ask this question without any kind of context. They don't tell me what kind of story they're writing. They don't tell me what the kind of plot or setup is so far. They just want to know how to write this kind of scene as though they're all uniform and they're all going to do whatever it is they do. And, well, that just doesn't work. So what I thought I'd do tonight is put together more or less something that demonstrates the utility of how to write and how to craft a scene. To take one scene, make a few tweaks to it, talk about how you would write it, and show you that you can take one idea, frame it, and lens it in a couple different ways, and end up with very distinct, separate scenes. So we're calling this one scene, 7 ways. But first, an intro. Ladies and gentlemen, guys, girls, non-binary pals, I hope you're doing well. We're doing something special. We're doing something different tonight. So I hope you don't mind a bit of a shakeup to our usual kerfluffle. This one goes out to all the writers who have specifically wondered, well, if they're doing a good job, if they're writing the right way, if they could be writing better, but they haven't quite asked for help yet. And for anybody who's just sort of struggling in how to identify what it is they're writing and whether or not it works for what it is they're trying to do. And of course, the comrades. And through no fault of my own, I continue to be John, the guy who's going to help you write better. It's really good to be here. I'm very excited. And by the way, we are still sponsored by Sprecher Brewery. Sprecher Brewery, established in Milwaukee in 1985. Sprecher Brewery is your home for the best root beer in the world, and your home for other delightful artisanal sodas, like their amazing fire-roasted grape soda. It's amazing. As well as a fair number of seasonal brews, including a cherry cola, one that is immediately drawing a blank because I didn't write it down in my notes, but Sprecher Brewery, available at sprecherbrewery.com. They ship everywhere, and their bottles are fantastic. Enjoy yours ice cold. Also, if you do get the root beer, put that shit over vanilla ice cream. You will be very, very happy with the results. And as always, everything this month sponsored by Sprecher. So thanks, Sprecher, for taking good care of me. Thanks so much for being a part of this. Thanks for having a good sense of humor, too. And I will keep drinking your delicious, delicious root beers. It also helps that you send them to me. So that's nice, too. We're all winning now. All right. Let's get back to work, though, shall we? So tonight, we're doing one scene 7 ways. And there's no way I could cover all 7, right? There's just no way. So there's way more than 7 things. So I picked 7 that are most common. And if you out there are watching this or catching this live on Twitch or following up on YouTube, hi YouTube, leave notes down in the comments and maybe we'll come back and do this for a different scene to cover other ways of handling things. But a note, and this is important, so hang on. Here's a note. This is going to be a little technical sometimes. I know that my technical stuff does not really go over well. I'm totally okay and totally willing to take the metrics hit. The algorithm does not like it when I get technical, but hey, we're going to have to get a little technical to break down some of these things. So with that in mind, we're going to do one scene 7 ways. If you have any questions at any point during any of this, please speak up. If you're watching this after the fact, go leave them in the comments in the YouTube video. And if you're listening to this and you happen to have questions, the 2 best things you can do are find me on Twitter, at awesome_John on Twitter, as well as just leave me an email, thewriternextdoor@gmail.com, or you can email me directly at johnhelpsyouwritebetter@gmail.com. Either one of those will get it to me. Ask all the questions you want. I'm super happy to help. All right, let's get started. Now, we need a scene that is going to be pretty universal, and we're going to take it in a couple different directions. So we need a nice base scene that you might encounter in a number of different stories. And I'm basing this on like just a regular Earth scene, but you could easily swap this out and turn some parts into science fiction or fantasy easily. That window dressing I'm leaving that all up to you, okay? For now, our scene tonight is 2 people, A and B, get into a car and drive to a location. A and B get into a car, drive to a location. That's our scene. We're going to cover it 7 different ways. Now, in each of these ways, we're going to add details. We're going to talk about what goes on the page, what you want to avoid putting on the page. We're going to walk through each of these 7 things to the best of our ability. But we will always come back to A and B, get in a car, drive to a location. All right? Let's get started. First up, as a dialogue scene. Now, a dialogue scene is where we are going to spend the majority of our page focus, that means the majority of the words on the page that the reader can read, we're going to spend a majority of that page focus on the dialogue between our characters, A and B. One of the first things we're going to need to keep in mind is that since we're not writing a screenplay, we can't only have the dialogue. At some point, we have to remind the reader and prompt the reader that, hey, while these two people are in the car and they're talking, they're also doing something, whether that's driving or fidgeting or fussing around with something or taking notes. They've got bodies. They're not just voices floating in space. And when you have a dialogue scene, you have to remember that the world is still in motion, even though the characters are, I'm making air quotes, just talking. Do not forget that. And do not forget how critical it can be to break up the alternating dialogue or the big long stretches of dialogue with those grounding actions. That's the actions that aren't talking. That's the actions that people are doing. Don't forget to break up your dialogue with just some movement or some outside detail so that we don't get this sense of just read a line of dialogue, read another line of dialogue, read a third line of dialogue. We want to engage the reader in more than just how they hear. Yes, I'm making air quotes again, how they hear the characters. So how would we do this? Keeping that in mind, where would we start? It's a dialogue scene. A strong move here would be to start us with talking because that's going to set the tone for the scene. So it's a dialogue scene. We start with talking. Whoever talks first, that's up to you. Generally, the character that speaks first in a dialogue scene either maintains the power dynamic or is trying to challenge something that will radically affect the power dynamic. There's very little wiggle room between. Here's what I mean when I say power dynamic. So in any character interaction, 2 characters, 3 characters, 5 characters, 1 character with themselves, whatever, there's always a jockeying for power. There's always somebody who's setting the tone, setting the focus, setting the precedent. They're in charge. They're in the superior position. They're dictating the terms to which the other people will react. They're in charge. They're expressing authority. They're expressing certainty. And it puts the other person or themselves or the other multiple people sort of on the reactive, on the defensive. So if A is talking first, the assumption the reader's going to make is that A is leading the power dynamic and they're in a superior position. However, if A is somebody who's really actively complaining because maybe B in a previous scene, told them that their idea was stupid, then A is really trying to overcome the power dynamic and shift things. There's far more variability than that. You can wiggle that as you need to. But generally, whoever goes first is either assumed to be in the superior position. They've got more options. They've got certainty. They've got confidence, or they're radically trying to change things. The reason there isn't a lot of middle ground, if you're just wondering why there isn't a lot of middle ground, is because middle ground doesn't translate effectively. It just makes the character's dialogue feel kind of like it's just taking up space, like it's tepid. Oh yeah, I'm just kind of talking, whatever. It's not a big deal. Those are the lines that are most likely to get cut or have the ability to be cut if you're looking to make revisions or edits, because they're not effectively moving things along. And I don't mean like moving the plot along, although that's a thing, but they're not doing anything. You could cut it and you lose nothing in the scene. Another note, since I mentioned the word plot. If you have 2 characters or more than 2 characters, it is very unlikely that they are going to stop and talk about the plot if they're in the middle of it. It's incredibly unlikely. Let's suppose that you and I right now are in your car or in my car, and we're talking about your book. We're talking about how it's going to get published. We're talking about the next steps. You are probably not going to turn to me and go, John, I know I have to write the book, and specifically I have to finish chapter 10, and then I have to write chapter 11, and then I have to write chapter 12, and so on. You wouldn't do that, because that is a really unnatural thing to say, given the fact that we've already established we were talking about your book. You might find an indirect way to bring up your book, but you're not going to outright detail the plot verbatim to me because that's weird. And that suggests that the reader, who's ever out there reading this scene that you and I are in, you're thinking the reader's dumb and stupid and they don't understand what's going on. So you're explaining it to them. Please don't do that. Plot does not live in dialogue. Because characters already know what they're doing. They don't have to stop and look and go, hey, character B, you know what I'm doing? No, character A, what are you doing? Oh, I'm in the middle of trying to figure out the equations that will, fire up the nuclear reactor. Well, if B can just look over at A and see the equations and the math being scribbled on a notepad, they don't need to say it. You can just see it. You can just show it. So be cognizant of how many times and how much, meaning how many words, how many sentences, how many paragraphs you're expending just to recap the plot that the reader already knows is in the middle of happening. So we start our characters off talking. A is going to go first. Why? Because we picked A. We could have B go first. That's fine. Whenever we have characters doing anything, speaking, acting, moving, jumping, running, climbing, whatevering, they've got a goal. And there's even a goal when characters are talking. They're trying to be persuasive. They're trying to be argumentative. They're trying to state how they feel. They're trying to verbalize something. They're trying to express something. They're trying to think. They're trying to do something. And you have to figure out what that is. You should know because you're the one writing it. And you have to address it with some kind of certainty. Even if the characters themselves are not certain, you should have some certainty as to what's going on and who's doing what and why they're doing it and why they're saying what it is they're saying. We don't only need to mention the plot. We don't only need to talk about it in like really tired specifics, but we need to know why this character is saying whatever they're saying. If you are about to ask me how many sentences should there be or how many paragraphs should there be, it does not matter. There is no magic number. There's no right number. There's no real wrong number. It's not like if you have 4, it's somehow better than 6 or something. You just have them talk. Have them talk. And when you're crafting the dialogue, you don't have to follow all the rules of grammar. You want to have some sentence fragments? Delightful. You want to, throw in some weird punctuation and some profanity? Great. Go for it. Whatever it is you want to do, whatever it is you want to accomplish, feel free to accomplish it. People talking, and I don't care whether they're elves, dwarves, robots, people from the 33rd dimension, random space aliens, walking bipedal toasters. I don't care who they are. The reader is presumably a human. So they're looking for the humanity in your characters. And communicating that through dialogue is an effective way of building a relationship between the story and the reader. Now, that does not mean that your 12th century royalty needs to sound like one of these guys from around the way, where we're just talking. They don't need to do that. You super don't need to do that. You don't need to forcibly write, and in the ye old times, the king doth... No, don't need to do that either. But you do need to relay in some way, shape, or form how the character sounds in a way that sounds like a person. Next, we want to figure out whether we're going to alternate or monologize. Alternating dialogue is A says something, B says something, back to A, then B, then A, then B, and it bounces around. Maybe we double up every once in a while, but we try to keep that movement of dialogue going. I say a thing, you say a thing. I say a thing, you say a thing. You say a thing, I respond. Back and forth, like we're tossing a ball between the two of us. That's alternating dialogue. The majority of 2-person scenes with talking will have some amount of alternation. We're going to bounce back and forth. Alteration is a totally different thing we're going to talk about in a minute. Monologizing, technical term, you maybe have never heard of it that way. Monologizing is the act of having a monologue, turning one character's speaking into something large and complex and detailed where the other character doesn't really have a verbal reaction to go with it. I, speaking into this microphone, to you, am technically monologizing. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong. When we're writing it down on the page, we want to make sure we have paragraph breaks. We want to make sure we're separating the dialogue so that it's effective. We still want to make sure we periodically stop doing the speaking and mention some actions in the real world so that the reader feels like they're in this car that character A and character B have gotten into and are driving to wherever they're driving to. The key to a dialogue scene is to keep things moving. You want to make sure you are gaining tempo, meaning you're making it easy to read and easy to keep going through it. We're picking up a little bit of speed because we're reading and we're following along. Most readers, most times, will look at dialogue and go, okay, if we're having this lengthy dialogue back and forth, there's probably not a lot of other stuff going on to focus on, so I can focus here, which is fine and well and good. And whether we're alternating or whether we're monologizing or a little bit of both, because you can do both, that's fine. These are just different tools in the toolbox. You put this stuff together, and your characters, while driving, bounce dialogue back and forth, say whatever they need to say. Maybe they get quiet. Maybe they speak in monologues. Maybe they have big, long chunks. Maybe they, speak in little short bursts. Figure that out based on how you want to craft the characters, and remember what the character's goal in the scene could be. Why are they saying that? Why are they doing that? How else could they say it? How else could they do it? What do they want? Why are they trying so hard to get it? Why aren't they trying so hard? Think about their goal and figure out their path to it. And then understand that dialogue by default, straight out of the package, dialogue is reactive. We don't sit here and talk about whatever, topic number one, just randomly. We talk about whatever we're talking about because we have a purpose, because we're thinking about it, because we want feedback on it, because we want to express it, because it's important in some way, shape, or form. We don't just randomly make mouth sounds at one another. Figuring out that utility is going to help our dialogue scene of A and B driving to a location feel very effective. And we want to position the reader as though they're in the car. Now, if we're writing this in first person, one of those two characters is going to be accessible mentally, internally, because they're the first person narrator. So we will have access to how they're thinking and feeling. We will have more information about that character than we would about the other character because we're not in their head. And that's going to help shape and structure our dialogue and shape and structure how we respond to the dialogue and shape and structure how the character responds to dialogue. All of that's fine. There is no one magic right way to do this. It's just a matter of setting it up so that it moves along. How long should this scene be? Oh, I don't know. How long do you need it to be? Is it more important that the characters say all the things and the driving is kind of like an, oh, by the way, we're driving? Or is it we're going to say very little because the drive is important? Where you put the focus matters. Pick and choose where you put your focus. It's going to make a difference. But that's going to lead us forward to the next thing, which is an action scene. Now, in an action scene, whether we're doing this as the big fight moment or just a random action beat in the second act or an action scene, whatever it might be, is where the biggest thing you want to get across to the reader is the action. So in this case, our action is driving to a location, which means we have to spend part of the scene, a paragraph, a sentence, some amount up at the top of the section, getting our characters into a position where they can do the action. So we got to get them in the car. Maybe they're already in the car. Great, fine, but they still have to be in the car. To put our focus on the action, we are going to use descriptive language to talk about how the action is occurring, how somebody's driving. Let's say A is driving. So we're going to talk about how A is driving. We're going to talk about the mechanics of A's movements. You know, they stamp on the brake, they turn the wheel, they grab the clutch, they do this, they do that, right? And you're going to talk about the car responding to those motions, the engine revving, the wheels spinning out, things like that. You're going to talk about the action as though the reader is watching it from the best position to see the thing you're describing. So if that means in some moments you are parking the reader like on the hump and they're looking at the back from the back seat forward, great. If you're going to say that they have to sit essentially in the lap of the driving character, great. If you need to pull the reader out for a sentence and have them float in space so they can watch the rear wheels spin, cool. But first and foremost, your job is to get across the action. And in an action scene, getting that information across matters because it's never just one action. Never just one action. It isn't just they drive and then they get where they're going, because that is a very boring action scene. There's no challenge. There's no threat. It's just I'm watching them do something. It's like sort of like watching the washing machine do the wash. And it's not even the washing machine because that has a clear top. I can look into it. So it's like watching your dishwasher. You can't see the dishwasher. You can hear it, but you're pretty much staring at nothing. You want to make sure that the action in your action scene feels engaging. So you're going to want to describe it and detail it. Now, you don't need to become like super hyper car guru person to understand everything about belts and foot-pounds of torque and spark plugs and the name brand of the hose that runs the fuel line. Like, you don't need that level of detail. No one gives a shit about that level of detail. You giving a shit about that level of detail is taking up brain space. You could dedicate it to, like, I don't know, better food recipes or butts or where you can get Sprecher root beer from. I don't know. There's so many other better things to put in your head than hyper detailed research for your fiction made up book, as though somebody's going to come across and give you like a college final exam that you have to get right in order for you to be a good writer or something. Do not fall for that. You don't need to do that. You just need to be able to relay to the reader the movie in their brain that you're trying to get across. So if you don't know the name of the catalytic converter, well, fun fact, no one gives a shit about a catalytic converter inside your action scene, where we're more concerned about A and B driving away from the monster that's chasing them. Your action matters here. An action scene, and we're going to talk about this with some other scenes as well, action scenes are all about tension and potential. The tension comes from the idea that you either, or the characters rather, either will or won't succeed at whatever they're doing. In this case, driving away from a monster we just invented. They're driving to a location, that location being away from the monster. So the tension there comes from a challenge. In your action scene, there needs to be a challenge. Maybe that challenge is the monster. Maybe that challenge is the kid's unsure he can, do the crane kick to kick the blonde kid in the face. Maybe the challenge is he has to triple deke and score a goal in the championship game. Maybe the challenge is the guy who's never made a foul shot in basketball has to win the school championship by throwing a foul shot. I don't know. There's a challenge. It's almost always external to the character. Why? Because it's more visual that way. You can have an internal challenge. Is the formerly corrupt lawyer going to stand up in court and do the right thing? Is he going to mention that he did all the bad things and he should go to prison? Is this a case of somebody admitting that, no, it was really me who committed the burglary? You can have an internal tension. You can have an external tension. You could have both. But you need to have some kind of tension. Nothing kills an action scene faster than characters doing stuff and the reader not really understanding why it's a big deal. Now I'm making a hyperbolic action scene where we're being chased by a monster. We got to get in the car and get away. But your action scene could also be something benign, like A and B have to drive to a location to move the couch that's tied to the roof of the car. Or A and B need to drive to the airport to pick up friend C or something. The specifics are variable depending on what we're talking about. But there's almost always 99.999999% 90% of the time, there's almost always a tension, not attention, a tension and a challenge, a difficult task that the character, usually the character doing the action in the action scene, is trying to accomplish. They have to drive the car to get away from the monster. They have to, make the perfect shot. They have to time the thing right so that they can get away, so they can succeed before the door closes or something. There's always a tension and a challenge. And whether your tension is just, oh God, I hope they're not attacked, or oh God, I hope the vampire doesn't show up here, or the challenge is, oh God, the vampire's here, what are we going to do? Knowing what that tension is, knowing what that action is, knowing what the potential stakes are. The potential stakes are the idea of what happens if this goes bad, or what happens if this goes well. Knowing all those things, walking into your action scene, so keep it all in your head, writer, will allow you to build the scene to always put that reader in the best position to see, I'm making air quotes, see what's going on. How do we write this, though? Well, action scenes generally don't have a lot of dialogue. It's very hard to convey the action of an action scene when everybody's talking, because readers have been, for the length of stories, conditioned that when there's talking, there's usually an absence or a lack of action. So if we have action, you probably want to focus on sentences describing what the action is or was and what the consequences were. You don't want to do it in this sort of very procedural way where it's action, sentence, consequence, sentence, action, sentence, consequence, sentence. Don't do that. It's going to be really mechanical. It's going to be really stiff. We don't want it to be stiff. We want it to feel cinematic. How do we do that? We pick a character, A or B, and in advance of you writing on the page, while you're in your note-taking, drafting stage, think about in your head, what are all the things A is going to do? Okay, they're going to get in the car. They're going to slam the car into reverse. They're going to press the gas pedal. They're going to back the car up. They're going to whip the wheel around, and they're going to tear out of the parking lot. Great. Then what are they going to do? Then they're going to slam on the gas, and the car's going to shoot forward, and they're going to try to outrun the big giant werewolf. Great. Those are all the things A is going to do. Now, A is not operating alone, so what's B going to do? All right, well, B is going to roll down the window in the car, lean out the car, and, I don't know, shoot bullets at the werewolf. Or they're going to, keep an eye out for something. Or they're otherwise busy reading a book, or they're looking at a map, or they're trying to get the phone to work. I don't know, but they're doing something. If you have multiple people in a scene, particularly an action scene, they better be doing something. A character that's just in a scene and not doing anything doesn't need to be there. Because what are they doing? They're just standing there. They're just set dressing. They're basically like a throw pillow on a couch. We want to make sure our characters are involved. So in advance, before we start writing this stuff down, think about all the things each character is going to do. Now, if you have more than two characters, you're going to have a longer list. What's A doing? What's B doing? What's C doing? What's D doing? However many people you have. And then try to organize these things so that we're not doing one character all the time, then going to another character. Don't do all of A, then all of B, then all of C, because that's going to feel really weird. I don't know how else to say it. What you want to do is pick an exciting thing, pick an interesting thing, then do that, then maybe show its consequence. A is going to slam the car into reverse. All right, what's the consequence of that? Well, B, who's sitting in the front seat, is going to get pressed back into the seat when the car lurches, changes direction. Great. That moves. So now we have A to B. What's the next action? Well, maybe this is where we can talk about B. Since we just mentioned B being pushed back into the seat, maybe this is the sentence where we can talk about B fumbling the phone out of their pocket. And then we can go back to A. And the construction of these sentences, the complexity they have, whatever it might be, is going to help the reader understand how urgent everything is. Big, long-ass sentences with lots of commas and big descriptive flourishy phrases about how you're talking about the texture of the car seat or the the sound the little plastic slide on the belt buckle makes. That's lovely. I'm very happy for you that you're able to detail a very small thing. But the longer your sentences, the absolute longer the sentences, the slower it's going to read. Now, there is a question over here in chat. In first person, would A see the things happening to B? Well, if A is driving the car and A has the ability to use peripheral vision, if I'm driving and if I'm A and you're B, if I'm over here trying to get the car moving, you're sitting next to me. It is very likely that A would see what character B is doing. You're right there next to them. If you put B in the back seat, maybe not. But that doesn't mean you wouldn't detail something. You don't want to put blinders in first person on where you just talk about A and you only stay with A because A's our narrating character and B's over there doing, what the fuck ever, and no one knows. This is not, there's no object impermanence. It's not like just because we're following A, B ceases to exist. If B is sitting next to A, think about if you were the one driving. If you're driving the car, can you see the passenger next to you? I mean, you got to turn your head, but if you're driving and you look to your right or your left or wherever, you could see other people. So yeah, it's very possible. You have to make this decision. This isn't a universal writing thing. It's what do you, the author of the scene, want? If you want A to be able to see B, well, then you got to make sure B is visible. Good question. Great question. But don't get bogged down in the rigidity of it. There's no one right way to do this. If you have A in the front seat driving and B dives into the back seat, then A doesn't have an exact verbatim super clear, like, I'm driving the car, you're behind me. I can't see exactly specifically what your hands are doing, but I can hear, I can engage other senses. If I yell at you, hey, get your phone out, see who you can call, and then I hear you fumbling around, I might not know specifically that you are trying to move your right hand this way and they're sliding against your jeans, and then, you move your leg and then this I can't see that because I'm driving the car, but I can at least hear you fumbling for your phone, or I can hear it beep or buzz or chirp or dial or whatever. Don't get bogged down in just one sense. Yes, most cinematic fiction is visually oriented. We're going to describe what you should see in your imagination. But that does not mean you can't also describe other senses, like what I can hear, what I can feel grabbing the steering wheel of the car. Is it vibrating and shaking because they shot out the tire? Is the car lurching and shuddering because it's a piece of shit car? Like, we have multiple senses. Don't get bogged down and only deliver one. Great question. Great question. Now, this action scene is going to go forward until one of two conditions is met. Either they reach their goal, so we get A and B to the location, or or option two, just so we're clear. Option number one, they get to their location. Option number two, it becomes impossible to achieve this goal. Maybe the monster tears off the car or catches up to them, or they crash. Generally, you're going to need those two fairly extreme options to end an action scene, because we want to maintain the action scene's tension. We want to maintain the idea that this was risky and dangerous, because if we worked really hard and it was really touch and go and who knows if we were going to succeed, when we reach our conclusion, the reader feels satisfied. Yeah, they made it. Hell yeah, that's great. And if they don't, if they crash, if they get caught, if the monster attacks, whatever, then we increase the tension because, oh my God, what's going to happen next? You do not want to just wrap things up. I get in the car and they drive away. That is a really dissatisfying ending, because all of a sudden, whatever tension or risk the monster posed, well, you got in the car and drove away. How big a deal really was it? You don't want the reader to feel like, well, what was the big deal? They just got in the car and drove away. If it's a big deal, the reader needs to feel that it's a big deal. That's an action scene. How long should it be? That's up to you. How many paragraphs? That's up to you. Is there talking? There can be some talking. I mean, it's not going to be as much as in a dialogue scene, because in an action scene, there's more action than anything else. It's kind of in the name. But that action scene is all about potential, reactions, and consequences. I do this, so then what happens? You do that, so then what happens? The monster does this, so then what happens? Think about it in an organized way. That doesn't mean you have to write one sentence at a time where it's action, reaction, action, react. Like, I mean, if we're writing a book for children, totally, absolutely you can. But if you're aiming this book for adults, you can smooth that out. You don't have to be so rigid about it. All right? That's an action scene. Let's go on to the next one. Next on our list is an investigation scene. This is also called a discovery scene. In an investigation or discovery scene, just like it says in the name, we have characters who are going to look for something and or discover something. Now, whether that discovery or investigation is external, like A and B are going to drive to the spooky house to look for clues, or whether it's an internal investigation, A and B are driving and A needs to have a very heartfelt conversation with B about what just happened, and we're investigating how B feels or how A feels. That internal-external debate is a bit more nuanced than I'm trying to have here, but the purpose of an investigation/discovery scene is to bring to the characters and the reader information that they didn't have before. Now, whether that information is stuff, like physical objects, we would call those clues, or whether it's the revelation of feelings. I feel this way and I didn't tell you before. Something like that. All that stuff, all those things, well, that all counts as investigation. One character is, through dialogue, through silence, through action, through movement, through something, is going to try and discover or bring out or educe from the other character what they're looking for. Remember, we talked about this with the dialogue scenes. Still true no matter what. Every character has a goal in a scene. If both characters are on the same page, if they're both characters, that's a terrible writing pun. Let's do better than that. If both characters have the same goal, then you don't want to just say something like A and B investigate, because that's really generic and vague. So they're going to come at the investigation in two different ways. Maybe A takes notes while B looks around. Think about it as though the reader is with the characters, following them. What would they be seeing? Well, what would the reader who's floating invisibly with the characters, what would they see? What would they watch A do? What would they watch B do? Think about it that way. Now, you don't have to give A and B their own individual paragraphs. You can. You don't have to. You're not limited to that. You could space it out. You could have this thing go on for a couple pages. Usually, investigation discovery scenes are slower in nature because we want to keep the reader paying attention, and we want to keep the reader figuring out, along with the characters, whatever the question to solve. In an investigation discovery scene, it's all about the question. Now, the question is whatever's material to the plot. If we're in the spooky house and we're looking for, who the ghost really is, then we're looking for clues about who's haunting the amusement park or something. If we are two detectives going to a crime scene, then our investigation is to look for clues as to who could be the murderer. If we have two characters who are driving away from a place and A really needs to talk to B about what just happened, then the question is, will character B talk about what's going on, or will they just sit there awkwardly in silence? There's always a question. There's always some goal that one character has that the other character doesn't have. That doesn't mean they're always opposed to each other, but every character is going to have their own goal. And every character in the course of a scene is going to try and accomplish their goal. In an investigation scene, at least one of the characters in the scene needs to be trying to resolve or answer a question. They need to be investigating. Again, it's in the name of the scene. The reason why this is sometimes called a discovery scene is because you discover stuff. Investigating usually means you're looking for stuff. I'm investigating. I'm looking through the filing cabinet. Discovery is usually more like I walk into a room and, oh, there it is on the floor. I discover it. It's a little less active. It doesn't mean anything from a writing perspective. Like it's all the same stuff. But if you really want to be fussy, a nerd about what kind of scene you're writing, if somebody were to ask, the distinction is how active the characters are in trying to do their thing. More active, investigation. Less active, more sort of like, oh, look at that. That's a discovery. The scene is slower in pace. Characters are trying to answer a question, solve a problem, do something, accomplish something. This scene is done when either, just like we talked about with the action scene, when either somebody is able to answer the challenge or the question, resolve it, end it, or they've gathered whatever material they can, but it has prompted future questions down the road. Like if we have our two detectives looking for clues and they find muddy footprints, that might be the end of this scene because they found the one clue they're supposed to find, but it doesn't immediately say, it's old man Parker's muddy shoes, because that's too far down the road. In an investigation scene or in a discovery scene, you need to be aware of the limits you're going to put on things. Limits like, how many clues am I going to have in this scene? And limits like, how quickly are the characters going to look at one clue, muddy boots, and immediately know the solution to things? Be very, 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 very careful with the speed at which characters find one clue and then immediately jump to the right conclusion. It's one thing if they see a clue and they see, smudges on the floor and they're like, it's someone with a peg leg. And in fact, it's not, and they're operating from bad or wrong information. A lot of writers won't do that because the writer thinks it makes their character stupid. And it maybe it does or maybe it doesn't. But there's nothing wrong with having your characters get stuff wrong. It's engaging. Believe me, if you're writing a detective story, have some characters get some shit wrong. I guarantee you people will pay more attention. How long is this scene? As long as you need it to be. It's going to be multiple paragraphs. Will there be dialogue? Probably. What will this dialogue be? Probably reaction. Hey, B, come over here. I think I found some muddy footprints. Hey, come check this out. Oh, holy shit, look. Wow. That's so cool. What the hell is that? Things like that. Very rarely, outside of really bad procedurals that your parents probably watch on TV, will you get a character who will say verbatim and specifically everything they see in addition to seeing it. Like if you watch a lot of CBS crime procedurals, the NCISs of the world or the CSIs of the world or the other ones I can't think of right now, you will find characters who all the time say, hey, I've got footprints over here. And then you see them looking at footprints. You don't need to double down like that unless you think your viewer, your audience, is like a 75-year-old person who can't entirely see too good and they're not really paying attention. So they're just kind of watching this comfort show because, it's got people in it or something. You want to be careful about that. You don't always have to double down and hyper super explain things. You don't always have to have characters get stuff right. You don't always have to put all the clues in one scene and then never do it again. You can parcel this stuff out. If you're about to ask me, hey, John, how do I know when I've stretched this too thin? Because you've added too many clues and it feels like the story takes forever to resolve. Make sense? I'm going to get another mouthful of tea. And then we will go on to a dramatic scene. All right. a dramatic scene. What the hell is a dramatic scene? Well, that's a scene with some kind of emotional drama. That's A and B arguing. Let's suppose that for our example here, A and B are driving home, and A is angry at B. In a dramatic scene, your first priority is to get across the emotional state of at least one character. Ideally, you're gonna get all the emotional states across of all the characters. That does not mean you're gonna write one sentence where it's A feels sad, next sentence B is angry. Because again, unless we're writing a book for children, you want to be more polished than that. But in a dramatic scene, whether this is an argument, whether this is a breakup, whether this is something tense, whether this is something emotional, whether this is something sincere, whether this is something difficult or whatever, you want to identify the emotional states of the characters involved. Because drama of any flavor comes from the reader or viewer understanding the character's emotional state relative to what's happening and having their own reaction to it. Let's suppose A and B are a couple and they're driving home after a particularly rough argument. A feels hurt, B is angry. Let's just hypothetically make this up. We've established their moods. How do we establish their moods and emotional states? Well, you don't immediately want to jump into talking because most of the time when two people argue, they're not usually all up in their words like, B, I need to talk to you about how I am feeling. How I am feeling currently is blah, 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 blah. Like, not everybody goes that deep into therapy all the time in every conversation because that's emotionally exhausting. So instead, we want to figure out how to convey how a character feels based on their body language, based on their movements, based on their actions. Do not limit emotional expression to just talking, because how we feel is conveyed to someone else by way more than just the words we use. The fact that I am sitting here and I'm fidgeting, or that my arms are crossed, or that I'm looking away and not making eye contact, or that I'm tapping my fingers against the door or something, all suggest an emotional state. They don't specifically suggest the exact thing I'm thinking. Like if you and I are talking and my arms are just crossed, you don't know the specific thing I'm thinking. You don't know that it's exactly because, oh my God, I'm really tired of talking. You might just gather that, oh, John is frustrated or John is irritated. Do not immediately jump to the specifics. Again, much like with the investigation scene, you don't have to have the character get everything right all the time in order to be, effective in a scene. Dramatic scenes deal with emotional states. And because we have character emotions, we have to create tension. Now, initially, that tension is going to come from the idea that we don't know how it's going to resolve. I'm angry. Well, how long am I going to be angry? Why am I angry? How angry am I? All three of those things revolve or orbit around the idea that I'm feeling a certain way. And it doesn't have to just be anger. You could be happy. You could have a positive dramatic scene where a character is just overjoyed. Oh my God, I'm going to be able to go to the concert or something. Not all drama is immediately bad and negative. It's just not. Some is, some's not. We'll talk about comedy in a second because that's a different animal. But for drama, we need to identify the emotion. We need to identify how they're conveying or expressing that emotion, because maybe it is talking, but maybe it's also more than talking. And then over time, we need to show how if you're B and I'm A and I'm feeling a certain way, your view and perception of my feelings influences how you feel. Here's something to think about. You, in your life, Presumably, you have interacted with another human being at some point in your existence. Over the course of time, you've said a thing or done a thing or made a face or made a move or done something, and a person has reacted to it. They haven't just said something. Maybe they've paused or thought or given you a look or walked away. They've reacted in some way. Understanding what reactions could be and then choosing one that makes sense for the context will go a long way to make your dramatic scene feel dramatic. If you have a character react totally like out of the blue with no explanation to all of a sudden like respond to a thing in a weirdly inappropriate and strange way, you're going to suck the drama out of this. Here's an example. A and B are two people. They've been arguing. They get into a car and they're going to drive home. They are now in the car and they're quietly fuming at each other. They're both angry. They're not talking. And if all of a sudden B turns around and just starts like, I don't know, singing a creepy children's horror movie song, that's weird, and it's going to take the tension away from the argument. It's going to pull the drama away. But if A and B have been arguing and B turns to A and calls him a real son of a bitch, well, that's more in line with the sort of context for the moment and allows you to develop the scene more naturally. This is going to be a combination of talking and feeling, paragraphs of text, lines of dialogue. If we're in first person, whatever your narrating character is, whether that's A or B, or C or D or Q or whoever, your narrating character, you're going to have access to their thinking, to their feelings. You're going to give that access to the reader. They're going to naturally side with that character because they've got more information, they've got more access. If we side with A, we're the reader, and we side with A, on some level, you can argue that we are guessing about B. We can see their body language, we can hear what they're saying, but the exact 100% correct A+ specifics, we've got to guess on. Yeah, we see they're angry. Okay, we can treat it and react to them as though they're angry. But the degree of anger, the cause of the anger, we got to guess at that. And that's part of what helps create the tension in a dramatic scene like that. We don't entirely know. In a dramatic scene, you do not want what's called 100% perfect transmission. 100% perfect transmission is no matter what, when characters interact, they expressly and always act correctly with perfect knowledge. They're never wrong. They're always right. And there's no problem whatsoever. Perfect transmission would be, let's see, let me give you an example of perfect transmission. A and B get in the car. They slam the doors. They're both angry. A turns to B and says, B, I'm very angry because I feel like you don't respect me. B turns and says, I'm hearing you say you don't feel respected. Well, I need you to know that I'm currently feeling completely rejected by you because the plan to do whatever they're doing in the plot was really mine and I didn't get any credit. So while you feel disrespected, I need you to know that your actions make me feel minimized. To which A will reply something like, minimized? I'll talk to you about minimized. How about that one time where it seems that you have a constant pattern of always minimizing what it is I'm doing? No, nobody speaks like that. That's not a thing. That's really weird. Perfect transmission means every character knows everything to the same degree. That's not how people are. That's not what readers are reading for. That's just not a thing. Don't overthink it. Don't do perfect transmission. Do imperfect transmission. Make people sound like people. All right, on we go to the next. A comedic scene. Oh boy. Mouthful of tea first. I do want to just come back for a hot second and shout out the sponsor today. Nope, that's the right button. That's the button. Sprecher Brewery. Milwaukee's own, world's best root beer, 1985, SprecherBrewery.com. Get yours today. Tell them I sent you. It'll be nice. All right. Nearly done tonight. Back to comedy. Okay. There are going to be some people who argue with me on this, and that's totally fine. That's what internet comment sections are for. In a comedy scene, you're still aiming for potential the way you were with a dramatic scene, except, and this is important, in a drama, we cared about the emotional state. In a comedic scene, we care more about the potential reaction. So, how do we write a comedy? Comedy is really fucking hard to write. I don't know if you know this. It's real hard to write funny. One way people do it is they write absurdity. They write real funny things, you know. They slip on a banana peel and fall down a flight of stairs. Physical comedy like that. Or they write funny dialogue, people cracking jokes, characters laughing. They make puns, things like that. But to truly craft a comedic scene, you have to understand the potential that the punchlines could be. Not, again, verbatim. We're not dealing with 100% transmission. But when you're writing something funny, or something more specifically that you want the reader to find funny, you're dealing with this potential space where we read the scene and we follow the action along and we see what's going on, and that tells us the setup to the joke. Then there's this unknown nebulous space of some amount of words, sentences, paragraphs, until there's a payoff, until there's a punchline. So if we're in, A and B are driving somewhere and they're urgently trying to get to Thanksgiving dinner, let's say, or Christmas morning, holiday event with family. A and B are driving, and all of a sudden they get stuck. Car comes to a screeching halt because they get stuck in a parade. The driving and the urgency to reach the holiday event is the setup. The fact that they've slammed the brakes on and they're stuck behind a parade is the payoff for the potential. I will get all the P words out. The comedy comes from the fact that the potential is often at odds with the setup. Maybe because it's absurd. Like, oh my God, it's raining penguins. Or maybe it's more linear, like, oh, we're stuck behind a Christmas parade. Or it's slapstick. A and B get into a childish slap fight while driving. Or the roof flies off the car, something like that. To build comedy, you have to understand the scene's construction, which means you're going to need to organize how the scene is written. What happens, in what order, who does what, why. What happens, in what order, who does what, why. That why isn't only why do the characters do what they do. The why can also refer to what happens. The roof flies off. Why? Because 3 scenes ago, they got into an accident and the car's been beaten up since. Great, fine. So they keep driving, and then the hubcaps fall off. Great, fine. Why? Because the car's been beat up, and they've been driving at 100 miles an hour, being chased by, I don't know, angry Shriners or something. Well, there's a little bit of absurdity because most people don't get chased by Shriners, so we're creating potential and paying it off. Comedic scenes are very transactional. You bring something in, you set it up, you do something with it. The reader gets a payoff. Setup, payoff. Setup, payoff. The longer you delay between those two things, you run the risk of either making the joke better, but if it runs on too long, see how big and awkward that pause was? The line falls flat. You're going to want to really effectively control how you're measuring out the payoffs, the setups, the reactions, the responses. Comedy is real hard. Comedy is super hard. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to get more tea. And then we've only got 2 left. We're doing great. Are there any questions so far? It's okay if there are not. It's okay if you have plenty. We're doing fine. We're doing great. I apologize for the abnormal nature of this. Mostly this is experimentation. I just wanted to answer all these questions at once. I hope this is helping. I hope this works. This will, I'll tell you right now, this will eventually make its way into text. And it will end up at some point, not in the immediate near future. I've got 2 other things to write. But there will eventually be a text, longer form breakdown of this stuff. It's going to be a while. Couple weeks at least, because I'm still working on the other thing I'm working on. So we just did comedy. What's next? A romantic scene. I wish I had like a romantic sound effect. Like that's not very romantic. But yeah. I'll put some romantic stuff on the board. I'll make sure I'll do that tomorrow. I've got a slow morning. All right, it's romance time. A and B are lovers. A and B are driving to a motel where they will have their, lengthy sex scene. We're not covering the sex scene. That's a different topic. That's a whole extra thing. So yay, sex scenes. Or maybe it's more like, I don't know, I guess it depends on how the sex is. But a romantic scene. Now, I'm going to say some things you've heard before. Romance scenes deal with tension and feelings. The tension comes from anticipation. It comes from the idea that we don't entirely know exactly when whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and we don't know what specifically is going to happen when it happens. Now, this is true for heterosexual romance, homosexual romance, every other flavor, every other thing in between. It is about potential and tension. The actions, the mechanics, the physicality, the flirting, the dialogue, all that stuff is pretty variable. But it all serves to either increase tension or be suggestive of potential. If you have stuff happening in a scene, lines being spoken, actions happening that are not increasing tension or suggesting potential, what the hell are they doing in this romance scene? Here is an example. If A and B are, they've snuck out from their relationships and they're meeting for a sexy rendezvous, then what, they're not going to sit there and go, hey man, you see the game last night? Because that's weird, and it has nothing to do with their intended goal. It doesn't help build tension. It doesn't suggest future potential. It's weird, idle chatter. And I don't know about you, in your relationships, if you've ever had one or you've ever been pursuing one, generally, when you're trying to get somewhere to hook up, you are not stopping and talking about the big game last night. So we want to make sure that we're focused to either create tension. Ooh, when is he going to kiss him? Or we're suggesting potential. Oh, they're certainly talking, you're writing descriptive sentences that really describe how hot people are. Or something like that. You don't want to turn around and talk about random shit. Yeah, I know. Somebody out there is going to go, yeah, but if you're nervous, you're just going to make strange chit chat, right? Yes. You totally are, but that's not all you're going to do. Because if you and I are in the car and we're driving somewhere and we know where we're going to go and we know that eventually when we get there, it's going to be pants-free zone and, everybody's, down for an experience or whatever, we're all going to party. I might be nervously trying to fill the space oh, you look really nice today. That's really great. Wow, I really like this. You look good. This was nice. That restaurant was good, wasn't it? Whatever. But in addition, I'm also feeling things. I'm also expressing myself. I've got body language. I'm moving. I'm thinking. I'm anxious. I'm, sitting there. I'm looking at you. I'm clocking things. We're describing more than just the talking. Do not, when you're writing romance, do not just get bogged down in verbal expressions of how a character feels. Because when you're trying to write a romantic scene and you're trying to build that tension so that there can be foreplay and flirting and the kissing feels earned and the sex feels passionate and hot for the reader, you don't want to put yourself as a writer in a situation where your characters are only relying on dialogue to convey how they feel. Because it gives the impression that your characters are just sort of sitting frozen in space, not moving their bodies, and somehow they're supposed to have like sexual tension in their voices. You look really nice today. It's really good to see you. You look so hot. This is really fun. I cannot believe we're doing this. That's how that sounds. If you put all the focus, all the eggs in the dialogue basket, and forget that these are two people who are about to just go party, well, then it sounds weird. They sound like hostages. They sound like they should be blinking and signaling for help. Like, they're not victims here. There are two people in a romantic scene. They've got wants, they've got needs, they've got fears, they've got feelings, they've got urges, they've got desires, they've got goals. They've had things they've been thinking about. They've got, plans, they've got urges, they've got this weight on them. Oh my God, I can't wait. I can't wait. I'm impatient. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Why are you still wearing clothes? Urgency, tension. In a romantic scene, if you are not moving the romantic scene to a sexual payoff in a romance novel, like all we're going to do is kiss and the sex comes later in the book, which is fine. That happens a lot. There's going to be some kind of physical bow to put on the scene. We're going to brush hands. We're going to kiss. We're going to, grope on each other. Something. There's going to be something. Why is there going to be something? Because if you fail to pay that off, if you fail to deliver on the potential, it's unsatisfying for the reader. Because, and not to be too coarse about it, imagine being a person in that situation. You're way into this other human. You totally want to take your clothes off. You totally want them to take their clothes off. And everything grinds to a halt. You might be frustrated. You might be a little irritated. It doesn't entitle you to do anything, like you're not owed anything, but you might at least have some feelings about like, oh man, I can't believe like we got this close and then we stopped. That's fine. Your feelings are valid. You just can't be an asshole about it. But you can still have those feelings and they can still be expressed. Not every payoff needs to lead to the ultimate, sexual conclusion. Sometimes, though, the physicality we want in those romantic scenes is earned, meaning we've been building up to it, and here we are, and now we're sitting in the car, and it's we're awkwardly, kind of circling each other visually. I'm describing how I feel. I'm looking at you and taking a guess how you feel, and we move a little closer, and we move a little closer, and we start talking about the physical description of faces or hands or skin or something. And then all of a sudden, boom, bang, there's kissing that happens. And that kissing feels like this tremendous victory, like, yay, we're kissing. That kiss has been earned because we had all this potential build up to it. If it just turns into, we just started kissing and it's just a thing we do, then it's unearned. There's a time and a place for unearned physicality in romance. Like, it's important that you know it happened, but it is not critical that you care a lot about it. It's sort of like you wake up next to your spouse, you just kiss them good morning, and you go on about your day. There was still some physicality there, but it's less important than whatever else is going to happen. It doesn't take up a lot of page space. Earned physicality and earned intimacy, which is the emotional stuff, which is all the non-physical stuff. Earned physicality and earned intimacy keeps the reader engaged. You can't have everything be earned, but it's because of the earned stuff that the reader keeps reading. The unearned stuff is nice, and it can be hot and titillating and arousing, but you can really only get the unearned stuff because you had earned stuff before. We built up to that first kiss. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. They kiss, and then all of a sudden, because we kind of got that out of the way. Now they can just start fucking in 10 pages. That's fine. That's great. That's how this works. Nice and straightforward. Earned and unearned come together in and around potential and tension. If you have romance without tension, it's probably either poorly written or it's just straight erotica. If you have no payoff and only tension, it's more emotional. It's almost dramatic at that point. You need the payoff. Somehow, some way, to some degree. There has to be payoff because that's what the reader's looking for. You can't just keep stalling and stalling and stalling. The longer you stall, eventually you hit diminishing returns. Eventually, like, it's been 300 pages. Why the fuck haven't they kissed yet? The reader starts to disengage from the story because it's unbelievable as to why they haven't. Like, you've taken too long. Don't take too long. How long is too long? It depends on the complexity of the story. It depends on how many characters. It depends on the plot. It depends on a lot of factors. But generally, you want to try and measure your romantic progression, what's called a romance arc or a physicality arc, through a few steps along the way. Build up, payoff, new build up, new payoff, new build up, payoff. Like a staircase, hierarchy. We go here, we hit a plateau, and then we build up, we hit another plateau, we build up, hit another plateau, and so on. You can only really do that so many times before the reader's like, will they just get it over with already? Versus not. All right? Are there any questions so far? Because we only have one thing left. So questions. And then we'll talk about the 7th of 7 ways. If you're about to ask me, hey, can we combine some of these things? Totally. You can have an action scene and a romantic scene where the action is the romance. They're finally tearing off their clothes. You know, you can have a comedic investigation scene where we're surprised by what we find. You can totally do that. But again, we've only ever had 2 characters get in a car and go to a location. Can I recap for you real quick? Yeah, absolutely. I can recap for you real quick. So just to recap, and if you've heard me say this before, I'll be fast. Loads of people ask me just about every week, how do I write XYZ kind of scene? I decided I would grab a few of those things and dump them all at once and show how you can take one scene and frame it in a couple different ways. So we built a scene, 2 characters, A and B. They get in a car and they drive to a location. We covered all of the following things as a dialogue scene. A talks to B, B responds, B talks to A. We talked about the power dynamics. We talked about the goals of dialogue and how you don't want your plot to live in your dialogue, but it's characters reacting to each other and expressing feelings. And the actions, the specifics of the driving, are less important than the dialogue because it's a dialogue scene. We talked about it as an action scene, which is sort of the inverse of a dialogue scene, where the more important thing is the action. So maybe we describe more about what people are doing and how they're doing it and how there are consequences and reactions to what people are doing. If I hit the gas, you're going to get smushed back against the seat, that kind of thing. And when we're in first person or third person, the amount of information we have or don't have. That's an action scene. An investigation or a discovery scene is the idea that somebody's got a question or there is a question and like Vanilla Ice, I'm going to solve it. And one character is trying to resolve this question, or maybe they're both trying to resolve the same question. Maybe they're 2 detectives on the way to a crime scene, or they're 2 teens who are going to go to the spooky house to figure out why the amusement park is haunted. The investigation is predicated on answering a question, and the tension in that scene comes from the unknown. Who knows what's around the next corner? Who knows what we're going to find? Who knows what's going to happen if we find anything? And we talked about clue development, and we talked about structuring the story so that the investigation matters. And we talked about the difference between investigation and discovery. If you have to work for it, it's investigation. If you just sort of somehow kind of like, oh my God, there it is. And you just sort of see it and you don't have to work so hard. It's a discovery. But in either case, it's about using that tension and potential to get the reader engaged. I don't want to use the word clue. Get the reader engaged to keep reading. From there, we talked about a dramatic scene where A and B each have goals, and the drama comes from the reactions and consequences as we try to mine and get to the truth or get answers to our questions or overcome our obstacles. Now, that drama can be positive. It can be, celebratory. Yay, we robbed the bank. Or it can be negative. Oh my God, I can't believe we just had a huge argument. It's easier to frame it. And the example I used was more negative because it's easier to explain. But you can have positive drama. From there, we just did comedic scene, which is how do we write something that's funny, which is all about setups and payoffs and the distance between the two, and how well and how effectively you can manipulate one or the other to get the amount of comedy you want. And if you take too long, the reader loses interest because they sort of forget why that's a payoff to whatever setup, because the setup was so long ago. And then, most recently, we just did romantic scenes where A and B are getting in the car to go off and have a romantic rendezvous. So we talked about creating tension. We talked about earned intimacy. And we just talked about a real sort of plateau hierarchical structure where we earn a thing, then we build to a new plateau, and then we build up to a new thing and earn it and go forward and go forward and go forward so that the romance always feels fresh, even as we are escalating from it. And this is true in hetero relationship, homosexual relationships, anything outside the binary, and everything in between. There's always a matter of tension, payoff, and buildup. That's your recap. And now, having covered all that, we are going to go to the climax. How would we take this scene, A and B get in a car and drive to a location? How on earth could that be a climax? Because that sounds like a really boring ass scene. Well, it isn't. It doesn't make for the most effective climax because it might not have enough action. It might not have enough stuff to it, but we can still make this a climax. For a climax, I don't care what genre it is. I don't care what's going on. I don't care the names of the people, whatever. For a climax, this has to be the most, fill in the blank, that you've written in the whole story. It's the most dramatic, the most intense, the most dangerous, the most urgent, the most critical, the most important, the most hard, whatever. The most, fill in the blank. If it's not, well, then it's not really a climax. And yeah, somebody out there is going to tell me that they can have multiple climaxes in a book. You can, but that's a totally different writing structure. And then they're not going to be as individually high a climactic peak in our story structure because we've got multiple of them, so we reduce them in height. That's like 5-act structure or 7-act structure. And the vast majority of human beings are not writing in 5 and 7-act unless you're writing in television, at which point you're not really going to need all the stuff I've just been talking about for the last hour and 22 minutes, but it is possible. However, we are talking about straightforward 3-act climactic structure. So A and B get in the car, drive to a location. In a climax, just like we talked about with an action scene, just like we talked about with an emotional scene, just like we talked about with a romance scene, there's an obstacle and a challenge to overcome. Characters have feelings about it, and the feelings and the obstacle are things that the characters have to overcome and resolve and deal with. They're going to use their skills, tempered by their moral code. I have a set of skills. The moral code says I will behave a certain way or not. I will try to overcome the challenge, and I will reap my rewards or my losses. So if the goal, because it's often easy to build your climax in and around a goal, if my goal is to get in the car and drive away before the volcano erupts, then okay. I need to make it difficult. I need to make the obstacle between me and the car. Or I need to make it between me, the car, and driving away if you want to split hairs.
One's not better than the other. I'm just thinking about one more than the other. You can have it the other way around. Totally fine. But what we have is an obstacle. Now, that obstacle could be external. When we were talking about action scenes, we made a werewolf. But that obstacle could be internal, a sense of fear, a sense of panic, a sense of running away and escaping your problems. Oh my God, I'm not a good enough driver. I can't outrace lava or something. You can have an internal or an external obstacle. The character, generally because of their character arc, has to try and overcome this obstacle. If your character arc does not come into play in your climax, ideally, it's because you resolved your character arc prior to the climax, and the victory you got in that arc helps make the climax possible. So, for example, I am a character who did not believe in himself, and I doubted myself this entire time, but I've recently begun to believe in myself, so I know that I can get in the car and outrace lava. Generally, resolving your arc just before or during your climax will be best for tying your story together and keeping the reader engaged. You generally, 90-something% of the time, do not want your climax to resolve before your character arc, because it's going to take away some of the tension and some of the risk and some of the reward of accomplishing the climax. It's not going to feel as big a deal because the character still has to grow, because the character still has to be challenged, because the character still has to overcome something. Generally, the climax is as we talked about, the most fill in the blank. So to do that, we want to tie a lot of things together so that we can definitely make sure it's the most fill in the blank, whatever. Make sense? Then, from there, we frame the scene in a series of paragraphs. Long, short, variable. Maybe there's some talking. Maybe there's not a lot of talking. Maybe there's an expression of feelings. Maybe there's a lot of feelings. I don't know. It depends on what you're writing. But as a climax, you're always trying to overcome that obstacle to reach your goal. It might not be a one step, one sentence, one paragraph thing. Maybe the obstacle in front of your car is a werewolf, and you're not going to deal with that thing in 2 sentences. Because if you're done with your obstacle and you resolve the climax really super quickly, your reader's going to sit there and go, why was this such a big deal? They handled it so easily. What you want to do instead is figure out how to write it, and this is variable. There's no magic trick here. Write it so that it takes an appropriate amount of time. However big the problem is, it's going to take more space. Big problem takes time, takes space. Small problem, small space. If you mash that up, small problem, big space, the reader's going to have to work extra hard to figure out why the fuck it's set up the way you have it. And most of the time, when that's the case, the reader gets confused. We don't want the reader confused, so try to match up the amount of space you're talking about a thing with how big a deal the thing is. Please, please do that. It makes life a lot easier. Now, on we go to the next part. We overcome the obstacle. From that point forward, from that sentence forward, from that part of the sentence forward, technically the climax is over. And you can make a case that everything, the same sentence, the rest of the sentence, the next paragraph, the next page, is immediately moving us towards resolution. You could make that argument. Nothing wrong with making that argument. I've made that argument a couple times. I probably will again. However, most people think that the climax ends with the end of the climax scene, which is fine. Then the climax scene is ends when the character achieves their goal, which was get in the car and drive away before the volcano exploded. So the volcano explodes, but they get in the car and drive away. End of climax, end of scene. Is one better than the other? Not really. It depends on what you want to do. It depends on what you're trying to say. Up to you. For me, you can make a case for either depending on how you want to frame it. It depends on what the obstacle is. It depends on how much time it takes for you to express it. It depends on how hard the character has to work, if there's other complications. It's There are so many variables that you can't easily just say it's always better to do this, not that. It doesn't work that way. It's never going to work that way. Anybody who says it works that way is dumb and wrong, and you should not talk to them nor share your chocolate milk with them. In a climax, what the reader is looking for is to see the character or characters overcome the obstacle and come out on the other side changed, usually, but not always ideally, for the better. Because you can have a climax where a character gives into fault, gives into the negative stuff, goes to the dark side, something like that. You can have that. That's still a climax. You don't automatically have to have a happy ending or a happy resolution. You just need to have a resolution, up or down, one way or the other. But you do need that resolution. If you don't have a resolution, if you do some bullshit, like the bad guy gets away so that you swear up and down, that's because they'll have it in a second book, then flat out, here you go. You're bad at this, and you should reconsider. Do not just have your villain run away. Do not just have your climax stop. Do not just have everything get off the hook, because that's uninteresting. That's dull. That's going to make the reader, who for some reason has stuck around this far, that's going to make them feel like you don't give a shit and you disrespected their time and effort, and they're going to be pissed. And that's how you end up with shitty reviews or returned books, neither of which are what you're looking for. Do not just stop your climax, resolve it. Yep. It means you got to make some decisions. But good news, writing is the act of making decisions, so you should be okay with that. That's a climax. How long is it? Long. How long? However long you need. It's generally one scene, but sometimes for some people that scene turns into a whole chapter, or 2 chapters, or 5 chapters, but it's still just one set of characters and one set of places doing one set of things for one obstacle, for one goal. If you have multiple characters in multiple places trying to work towards the same goal, as long as you can establish that the actions and places are connected in some way, like one character's in the library looking up the magic spell while the other character fights the werewolf and then casts the spell to defeat the werewolf. They're working together, but they're in 2 spots. As long as you can establish a relationship between all the disparate pieces, it's going to make sense just fine. And that's it. That's one scene. 2 people get in a car and drive to a location. That's one scene, 7 different ways. Are there any questions? Oh, man. That was a lot. What kind of tea am I drinking tonight? Great. It is... What is this tea? This is from Tea Forte. It is, it's just black tea, but it's got some orange in it. It's not bad. I just grabbed something out of the cabinet. It will be a root beer in about, 20 minutes or so. I'll have a root beer. Yeah. That's nice. Thank you for asking. All right. Any other questions, issues, comments, etc.? Else we will go to the outro. I should point out before we do, if you have any questions about any of this at any time, you can always come ask. If you want, for free, with no obligations whatsoever, to ask as many questions as you want about whatever, I'm going to give you a website. All right. Actually, can I just type it straight on the screen? I bet I can. Let's give this a try, shall we? We're going to do... Why is this link always so long? I don't know why that link is so long, but let's make this like a normal size. if you go to johnhelpsyouwritebetter.as.me/free consultation, which you could also get to if you go to johnhelpsyouwritebetter.com and click on the little blue button that pops up right away. johnhelpsyouwritebetter.as.me. You can book a free 30 minutes where you can ask me all the questions you want, and I will explain all of this all over again happily anytime. Oh, I forgot the thing with the website. It's a different website. So if you're watching this in chat, it just popped up with the Writer Next Door. It's no longer the Writer Next Door. It is johnhelpsyouwritebetter.com. I knew I forgot one. I'll fix that for next week. But shall we hit the outro? Shall we get out of here? To the outro. So this was something different tonight, and I'm very appreciative for a chance to do something different. It meant a lot to me. I'm always glad to break this stuff down. This was kind of a hybrid between what used to be the old Monday night lessons and the Wednesday chat. If you liked this, let me know. The two things you can do to really tell me you like it are when this hits YouTube, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, click subscribe. It's free. If you really enjoyed this elsewhere, leave a review wherever you listen to your podcast. And just find me on Twitter, awesome_John. I'll be more than happy to take your feedback and do more of this in the future. If you want to break down other scenes in other ways or do a different 7 ways to do a different scene, I'm always game for it. I want to thank everybody for listening. Thank everybody for being here. It really meant a lot. Please wear a mask. Look out for the infirmed and sick. All power to all people. Take care of yourself. Tell people you love them. Be good to yourself. Be kind. Genuinely be kind and helpful. It's not that hard. It might be new and random, but it's super helpful. Tell somebody you care. Tell somebody they made a difference in your day. They're worth it. You're worth it. Please keep writing. Please keep making stuff. I love you, and I'll talk to you guys very, very soon. See you!